The spotlight hit her, stark and unforgiving, illuminating the shaved head and the fierce, defiant eyes. She stood on the grand stage of Saturday Night Live in October 1992, a figure both fragile and formidable. The final notes of a haunting, a cappella version of Bob Marley's War hung in the air. Then, in a moment that would forever define her public image and send shockwaves across the globe, she held up a photograph of Pope John Paul II, tore it into pieces, and declared, "Fight the real enemy." The immediate silence in the studio was deafening. A collective gasp felt across millions of living rooms. This was Sinead O'Connor, and her act was not a plea for fame, but a searing indictment, a cry from the depths of a soul burdened by unseen pains and unhealed wounds. At that moment, public perception fractured. To some, she was a brave visionary, a fearless truth-teller exposing hypocrisy and injustice. To others, she was a blasphemous pariah, an unstable attention-seeker who had committed an unforgivable act. The media frenzy was immediate and brutal, painting her as volatile, unhinged, and ultimately a tragic figure destined for obscurity. Yet, beneath the headlines and the public outrage lay a story far more complex and heartbreaking than any tabloid could convey. This was not merely the tale of a pop star's controversial moment. It was the saga of a child scarred by abuse, a sensitive artist wrestling with profound mental health struggles, and a relentless seeker of spiritual truth in a world that often misunderstood her deepest intentions. Her life, from the quiet torment of her early years to the blinding glare of international fame, was a constant battle, a raw, uncompromising quest for authenticity that often collided head-on with the demands of the music industry and societal expectations. She was a voice of ethereal beauty and profound pain, a paradox of fragility and an almost terrifying strength. As the world watched, sometimes in awe, sometimes in horror, a deeper narrative began to unfold. A story of resilience, of an unyielding moral compass, and the devastating cost of speaking uncomfortable truths in a world not ready to listen. This was the story of Sinead Marie Bernadette O'Connor, a woman who dared to stand alone, and in doing so, became a martyr for her own convictions. Her path was rarely smooth. Often it was a rocky, treacherous ascent, fraught with unseen wounds and silent sacrifices, all for the elusive embrace of peace and the desperate hope that her voice, however challenging, might truly be heard. On December 8, 1966, in Glenageary, County Dublin, Ireland, a soul brimming with intensity was born, christened Sinead Marie Bernadette O'Connor. She was the third of 5 children to John O'Connor, a structural engineer, and Marie O'Connor, a homemaker. And their family background was rooted in Irish Catholic tradition, a cultural framework that would later become both a source of deep spiritual yearning and a target for Sinead's fierce rebellion. The early years of the O'Connor household were marked by increasing tension and profound dysfunction. Sinead's childhood was tragically scarred by severe emotional and physical abuse, primarily at the hands of her mother, Marie. This was not merely a difficult upbringing. It was a period of sustained torment that left indelible wounds on her psyche. She later described her mother as violent and unstable, recounting harrowing experiences of emotional cruelty and physical beatings. This pervasive atmosphere of fear and trauma fundamentally shaped Sinead's worldview, fostering a deep-seated mistrust of authority, a visceral empathy for the suffering of others, and a relentless, almost desperate search for justice and healing. The fragmentation of her family was a crucial event. Her parents divorced when she was 8, a split that, while perhaps offering a temporary reprieve from her parents' marital discord, did little to alleviate the deep-seated abuse she endured. Her siblings, Joseph, Imiar, John, and Kieran, also navigated the turbulent waters of their home life, each affected by the pervasive dysfunction. Sinead, even as a child, exhibited unique traits, a profound sensitivity, an intense intelligence, and an artistic inclination that provided a refuge from her bleak reality. She possessed an early talent for singing, often finding solace in music, channeling her pain into melodies. There were no traditional nicknames. Instead, her early identity was forged in the fires of survival and a burgeoning sense of defiant independence. The socio-economic environment was middle class, but the emotional poverty of her home overshadowed any material comfort, creating an internal landscape of profound isolation and unspoken suffering. Her teenage years were further marked by rebellion and institutionalization. At the age of 15, after persistent shoplifting and truancy, she was sent to Angrianan Training Center, a Magdalene asylum. These institutions, run by the Catholic Church, were notorious for their harsh discipline and often abusive conditions. Despite the harshness, it was within the walls of Angrianan that Sinead's musical talent was truly discovered. A nun there noticed her singing and encouraged her, even arranging for her to take music lessons. It was a paradoxical environment, a place of confinement and suffering that unexpectedly became the initial catalyst for her entry into her field. This experience deeply cemented her mistrust of institutional power, particularly the church, and fueled her later activism. The state of the music industry felt distant, an almost fantastical world, but the act of singing, of expressing her truth through melody, became her most profound motivation. Her initial hurdles were immense: a traumatic past, a rebellious spirit ill-suited for conventional paths, and an industry that often prioritized conformity over genuine artistic expression. Yet, the raw power of her voice, imbued with the depths of her suffering, was already poised to shake the world. Sinead O'Connor's journey to fame was not a carefully calculated ascent, but a tempestuous, often self-sabotaging surge, driven by a raw artistic vision and an unyielding commitment to truth. After her release from Angrianan, she honed her musical skills, often performing on the streets of Dublin, her voice a piercing, unmistakable instrument. She struggled to find her footing in the nascent Irish music scene, facing skepticism from industry gatekeepers who found her uncompromising nature and unconventional appearance challenging. She was too intense, too earnest, too openly wounded for the polished pop landscape of the early 1980s. Poverty remained a looming threat. She moved to London, often living hand-to-mouth, relentlessly pursuing her musical dreams. Her relentless efforts were fueled by an almost desperate need to communicate, to articulate the pain and injustice she had witnessed and endured. She collaborated with various musicians, absorbing influences, and slowly shaping her distinctive sound. A pivotal moment came when she was signed to Ensign Records in 1986. Her debut album, The Lion and the Cobra, released in 1987, was a stark, ethereal masterpiece. It showcased her incredible vocal range, her poetic lyrics, and a raw, emotional vulnerability that captivated critics and a discerning audience. Tracks like Mandinka and I Want Your Hands on Me revealed an artist unafraid to expose her soul. The public and critical reception to her debut was overwhelmingly positive, a swift ascent from obscurity. Critics hailed her as a unique and powerful new voice, praising her uncompromising artistry and magnetic presence. She garnered international attention, leading to Grammy nominations and a growing fan base drawn to her fierce independence and raw honesty. However, the true breakthrough, the moment that propelled her into global superstardom, arrived with her cover of Prince's Nothing Compares to You in 1990. The accompanying music video, a simple yet profoundly moving close-up of Sinead's face as she cried genuine tears, became an instant cultural phenomenon. Her raw emotion, her shaved head, and her piercing gaze captivated the world, transforming the song into a global #1 hit. The impact of her rising fame on her personal life and family was immediate and overwhelming. Financial struggles vanished, replaced by immense wealth, but this brought with it an unprecedented level of scrutiny and intrusion. Her previously strained relationships with family members became even more fraught, amplified by the glare of the public eye and the difficulty of navigating such intense celebrity. The quiet, solitary world she had often inhabited was shattered, replaced by constant media attention and the relentless demands of a global touring schedule. She gained immense professional validation, but at the cost of her privacy and a growing sense of disillusionment with the very industry that had made her a star, setting the stage for future conflicts born from her uncompromising moral compass. Sinead O'Connor's romantic entanglements were often as tumultuous and unconventional as her public persona, a series of passionate connections and profound heartbreaks played out against the backdrop of an intensely scrutinized life. Her relationships were never simple dalliances. They were deeply emotional unions, often challenged by her fierce independence, her ongoing battles with mental health, and the relentless pressure of fame. Her first marriage was to John Reynolds, a drummer who also co-produced many of her early works. Their union, which began in 1989 and produced her first son, Jake, was born of artistic collaboration and mutual respect. However, the intense pressures of Sinead's rapidly ascending career, coupled with her own internal struggles, placed an immense strain on the marriage. While their professional partnership often thrived, the personal relationship ultimately succumbed to the weight of fame and individual complexities, leading to their divorce in the early 1990s. Despite the separation, Reynolds remained a significant figure in her life, a consistent musical collaborator and a friend. Following her divorce from Reynolds, Sinead entered a relationship with Irish journalist and music producer Nick Sommerlad, whom she married in 2001. This period was marked by a desire for greater stability and a more private life, away from the intense media glare that had defined her previous decade. However, this marriage, like many of her relationships, was relatively short-lived, highlighting her restless spirit and the inherent difficulties of sustaining conventional relationships amidst her unique circumstances. Perhaps one of her most publicly scrutinized relationships, though not a marriage, was with Irish journalist and writer Frank Bonadio, with whom she had her third child, Shane, in 2004. This relationship, while offering deep personal connection, also coincided with periods of significant vulnerability for Sinead, further illustrating how her personal life was often intrinsically linked to her ongoing struggles with mental health. Her later marriages, including to musician Steve Cooney in 2010 and therapist Barry Harridge in 2011, were notably brief, sometimes lasting only weeks. These short unions, often announced with a flourish and then quickly dissolved, became a source of tabloid fodder, contributing to a public narrative of instability and impulsiveness. However, for Sinead, they represented genuine attempts to find connection and stability, albeit often ill-fated. The societal context of these entanglements was often unforgiving. In the 1990s and 2000s, female celebrities were still largely expected to conform to certain romantic ideals. Sinead, with her unconventional choices, her outspoken nature, and her visible struggles, defied these expectations. Her romantic life was frequently framed by the media as chaotic or tragic, rather than a genuine search for love and belonging. This constant public dissection, coupled with the emotional toll of each relationship's complexities, contributed to her sense of isolation and her deep-seated mistrust of the media. She navigated these challenges with a raw honesty, often articulating her pain and her yearning for love in her music, transforming private heartbreak into universal anthems of vulnerability and resilience. Each romantic chapter, whether triumphant or devastating, served to deepen her understanding of herself and her capacity for both love and sorrow, framing her not just as a musician, but as a deeply human figure striving for connection in a world that often misunderstood her. The zenith of Sinead O'Connor's career was a period of breathtaking artistic purity and global recognition, centered predominantly around the late 1980s and early 1990s. This was when her unique blend of raw emotion, piercing vocals, and fearless integrity captured the world's attention, establishing her as an artist of unparalleled depth and conviction. Her most iconic role was simply being herself, a shaved-head chanteuse with eyes that held the weight of the world, unafraid to speak truth to power. Her groundbreaking achievements were heralded by her debut album, The Lion and the Cobra, 1987, which showcased her extraordinary vocal range and a lyrical intensity that belied her youth. However, it was the release of I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got in 1990 that catapulted her into global superstardom. The album was a masterpiece of vulnerability and strength, achieving multi-platinum status and earning widespread critical acclaim. Its lead single, the hauntingly beautiful cover of Prince's Nothing Compares to You, became a worldwide phenomenon, topping charts in numerous countries. The accompanying music video, a stark close-up shot of Sinead's face as she shed genuine tears, was iconic in its simplicity and profound emotional impact, solidifying her image as an artist of immense emotional honesty. The public persona she projected during this peak was one of fierce independence and uncompromising authenticity. She was not concerned with conventional celebrity glamour. Instead, she embraced a minimalist, almost monastic aesthetic, symbolized by her shaved head, which became her defiant signature. This look challenged traditional notions of female beauty and femininity in the music industry. She was seen as a rebel, a spiritual seeker, and a fearless advocate for social justice, often speaking out on controversial issues like child abuse and the oppressive influence of the Catholic Church. This persona was not a performance. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of her true self, a reflection of her unyielding moral compass. She refused to be packaged or commodified, a stance that resonated deeply with those seeking genuine artistry. Vivid scenes of Sinead at work during this period reveal her intense dedication and emotional vulnerability. In the recording studio, she approached her vocals with an almost spiritual fervor, each note imbued with profound feeling. Producers often spoke of her intuitive understanding of melody and arrangement, her ability to convey complex emotions with breathtaking clarity. On stage, during sold-out tours, she commanded audiences with an almost shamanic presence. Her performances were not about elaborate sets or choreographed dances, but about the raw, visceral power of her voice and the intense emotional connection she forged with her listeners. She would stand still, bathed in a single spotlight, delivering her songs with an almost painful honesty, often moving audiences to tears. Interacting with fans, she often exuded a quiet warmth and a genuine empathy, a stark contrast to the sometimes combative persona she displayed in the media. With colleagues, she was respected for her unwavering commitment to her artistic vision, even if it meant challenging norms or authority. Her cultural impact during this peak was immense and transformative. She became a powerful voice for survivors of abuse, an outspoken critic of institutional corruption, and a symbol of uncompromising artistic integrity. She challenged the prevailing notions of what a female pop star should look like and what topics she could address. Her willingness to speak her mind, even at great personal cost, opened doors for future artists to be more authentic and politically engaged. She didn't just sell records, she sold truth, courage, and a powerful, enduring message of standing up for what you believe in, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of global consciousness and reminding the world that silence can be the greatest betrayal. Beneath the raw power of her voice and the fierce defiance of her public acts, Sinead O'Connor's secret personal life was a landscape of profound inner conflicts, a constant battleground where the trauma of her childhood clashed with the relentless pressures of fame and an unyielding spiritual quest. The unwavering conviction she projected outwardly often masked a deep-seated fragility, a lingering echo of the severe abuse she endured at the hands of her mother. This early trauma instilled in her a profound sense of abandonment, a desperate need for justice, and an almost hypersensitivity to suffering and hypocrisy, which fueled both her artistic genius and her personal struggles. The constant search for healing, for a voice to articulate her pain, became the central driving force of her existence. Her inner conflicts were vast and complex, dominated by her lifelong battle with mental illness, specifically bipolar disorder, and later, borderline personality disorder. This was not a private struggle. Her symptoms often manifested publicly, leading to erratic behavior, controversial statements, and a public perception of instability that overshadowed her artistic contributions. She grappled constantly with suicidal ideation, particularly after the loss of her son, Shane, in 2022. The loneliness that often accompanies severe mental illness, compounded by the isolation of extreme fame, was a constant companion, despite her numerous relationships and children. She felt perpetually misunderstood, her desperate pleas for truth often interpreted as attention-seeking or madness. Sinead's family issues, particularly her fractured relationship with her surviving siblings and the complex dynamics surrounding her children, were a source of ongoing pain. Her fierce protective instincts as a mother often collided with the challenges posed by her own mental health and the public scrutiny of her life. The ambiguity surrounding her relationships, whether with partners or family, often stemmed from her own struggle to form secure attachments due to early trauma, leading to patterns of intense connection followed by sudden withdrawal. The pressures of fame contributed significantly to these internal battles. The very platform that allowed her to speak her truth also amplified her struggles, turning private anguish into public spectacle. The music industry's demands for conformity often clashed with her defiant spirit, leading to clashes with record labels and a sense of alienation. She found solace in unexpected places. Her deep spiritual faith, which evolved from Catholicism to Rastafarianism and then to Islam, provided a constant anchor, a private conversation with God that offered a respite from the earthly chaos. Her close friendships, often with individuals who understood the complexities of her mind, provided rare moments of respite and genuine connection, allowing her to shed the public persona and simply be Sinead. These confidants witnessed her profound empathy, her sharp intellect, and her devastating vulnerability, understanding that the powerful voice the world heard was intricately linked to the profound, often unbearable pain she carried within, a testament to how the wounds of a lifetime fueled both her genius and her most agonizing battles. The final decades of Sinead O'Connor's life were marked by a poignant, often heart-wrenching decline, a slow unraveling shadowed by relentless personal tragedies, and a valiant, yet often losing, battle with mental illness. While she continued to record and perform, the narrative of her career shifted from a groundbreaking artist to a complex figure battling overwhelming personal demons in the public eye. Her decline was not a singular event, but a cumulative toll of unaddressed trauma, profound grief, and the brutal weight of public scrutiny. The events leading to this decline were deeply rooted in her lifelong struggle with mental health. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder and later borderline personality disorder and complex PTSD, Sinead's inner turmoil often manifested in erratic public behavior, increasingly frequent public pleas for help, and a series of hospitalizations. Her candidness about her struggles, while brave, often led to further stigmatization and misunderstanding from a world not yet equipped to handle such raw honesty. Career setbacks often followed these public disclosures. Some saw her as unreliable, further marginalizing her within an industry that had always struggled with her uncompromising nature. The specific circumstances of her final years were tragically dominated by the loss of her beloved son Shane, who died by suicide in January 2022 at the age of 17. This event was an unbearable blow, a trauma that seemed to push her beyond her breaking point. Her public posts about Shane's death, filled with raw grief and despair, revealed the devastating impact on her closest confidants and her own deteriorating emotional and physical state. She spoke openly about her struggle to cope, her profound sadness, and her own thoughts of self-harm. The emotional deterioration was stark. A woman who had always fought so fiercely now seemed utterly broken by an unendurable sorrow. Her passing on July 26, 2023, at the age of 56, was sudden but, to those who had followed her journey, carried a sense of inevitability, a tragic climax to a life lived with immense pain and unwavering conviction. While the official cause of death was later confirmed to be natural causes, the shadow of her recent profound grief hung heavy over the news. She was found unresponsive in her London home. Who was present in her final moments remained private, but the world knew the profound loneliness that often surrounded her in her later years. There were no reported last words, only the quiet, heartbreaking silence after a life lived so loudly, so bravely, so intensely. Her death brought a profound sense of sorrow and a collective moment of reflection on a life that had challenged, provoked, and ultimately, deeply moved millions. The immediate reactions to Sinead O'Connor's death on July 26, 2023, were a global outpouring of shock, profound grief, and a collective reckoning with her extraordinary, often misunderstood life. News channels around the world immediately interrupted their programming, and social media exploded with tributes, memories, and expressions of sorrow. The music she created, particularly Nothing Compares to You, dominated airwaves, a haunting soundtrack to a world reflecting on a voice now silenced. There was a palpable sense of loss for an artist who had never shied away from difficult truths, even when it cost her dearly. Her funeral service, held privately for family and close friends, was followed by a public procession through Bray, County Wicklow, Ireland, where she had lived for 15 years. Thousands lined the streets, a quiet, respectful crowd offering flowers, messages, and a collective farewell. Notable attendees included U2's Bono and The Edge, Bob Geldof, and Irish President Michael D. Higgins, all paying their respects to a woman who had dared to challenge the status quo. The atmosphere was one of solemn dignity mixed with a deep sense of national pride and collective mourning. Her hearse was adorned with flowers and a rainbow flag, a testament to her embrace of all communities. The media coverage was extensive, a global retrospective of her career, meticulously detailing her musical triumphs, her iconic moments of protest, and her lifelong battles with mental health and institutional injustice. Editorials pondered her legacy, acknowledging her prescient warnings and her unwavering integrity. There was a pervasive sense of collective regret, an acknowledgement that perhaps the world had not been kind enough or understanding enough to her during her most vulnerable moments. The grief of her surviving children, Jake, Roisin, and Yeshua, and her remaining siblings, was intensely private but profoundly felt, amplified by the public outpouring of emotion. Friends and former collaborators shared heartfelt anecdotes, painting a more intimate portrait of a complex, brilliant, and deeply empathetic human being. The wider public mourned not just a singer, but a fierce advocate, a raw artist, and a powerful voice for the voiceless, embracing her legacy with a newfound understanding and a profound sense of gratitude for the truth she dared to speak. Sinead O'Connor's long-term legacy is not merely etched into the annals of music history. It is a searing, indelible mark on the cultural consciousness, a testament to her profound artistic integrity and her unwavering commitment to social justice. Her story irrevocably reshaped the music industry by challenging the very notions of celebrity, artistic control, and the role of an artist in speaking truth to power. She proved that commercial success did not necessitate artistic compromise, even if it meant sacrificing that success for her convictions. She paved the way for countless artists to be more authentic, more politically engaged, and more open about their personal struggles, breaking down barriers of silence and expectation. Lingering mysteries and prevailing myths continue to swirl around her, fueling endless discussion. The most pervasive myth is that her Saturday Night Live protest was a calculated publicity stunt, a misconception that willfully ignores the deep trauma and profound spiritual convictions that motivated her. Another myth suggested she was simply crazy or unstable, overlooking her very real diagnoses of mental illness and the systemic failures that often failed to support her. These enduring questions contribute to her iconic status, keeping her name in the cultural conversation even years after her passing. Common misconceptions often reduced her to her shaved head and her controversies, ignoring her profound musicality, her lyrical depth, and her extraordinary vocal talent. She was often mislabeled as merely rebellious, when in fact, her acts of protest stemmed from a deeply moral and spiritual place, a desire for justice for the vulnerable and oppressed. She was not just a singer, she was a modern-day prophet, a raw, uncompromising voice that forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths. Her story continues to resonate profoundly because it is a raw, unflinching narrative of courage, conviction, and the devastating cost of integrity. It's a tale of a deeply wounded soul finding her voice and using it to challenge systemic abuses, particularly within institutions she believed had harmed children. From the harrowing abuse of her childhood to the relentless public vilification, and finally to the profound grief of losing her son, Sinead's life is a saga of enduring pain and unwavering defiance. She implicitly taught contemporary audiences about the importance of speaking out against injustice, the complexities of mental illness, and the profound resilience of the human spirit. Her legacy is one of defiant truth-telling, a powerful, albeit tragic, embodiment of artistic and moral courage. Through her music, her protests, and her unflinching honesty, she gifted the world not just beautiful songs, but a powerful, enduring lesson that the greatest acts of love can sometimes be the most uncomfortable truths, leaving an indelible mark on the world by daring to live and scream its truth, no matter the cost. The final whisper of Sinead O'Connor's earthly journey has faded, but the echoes of her raw, unforgettable voice will resonate through the ages, a haunting melody woven into the very soul of rebellion and redemption. She was more than a singer. She was a wounded healer, a fierce warrior, a tender spirit who dared to expose the shadows of the world with the searing light of her truth. Her life, a symphony of pain and profound spiritual seeking, painted vivid scenes of what it meant to be broken yet defiant, to be outcast yet utterly authentic, all while carrying the weight of a world's suffering on her slight shoulders. From the quiet torment of a traumatized child to the global stage where she challenged empires, she navigated a world that tried to silence her, choosing instead to roar one stripped-back ballad, one shocking protest, one heartbreaking plea at a time. The legacy she leaves is not merely a collection of haunting songs or a controversial act of defiance, but a potent, unyielding question whispered into the winds of time. What is the true cost of speaking truth to power? And what profound healing can emerge when we finally listen to the cries of the wounded? Her spirit, a beacon of defiant integrity and fierce compassion, will continue to burn bright, a permanent fixture in the pantheon of those who dared to live, to love, and to create without compromise, leaving behind a world forever altered by the raw, unadulterated sound of her own uncompromising heart.